Today, we're diving into the underdogs, games that had everything going for them except success. Whether they were ahead of their time, misunderstood, or just released at the worst possible moment, these titles deserved way more love than they got. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be asking how the hell these games didn't blow up. Back when it launched, the biggest complaint about the Order 1886 was that it was too short. But what most people missed is that behind that 6-hour runtime was one of the most visually stunning experiences of the entire PS4 generation. The game throws you into a gritty alternate version of Victorian London, where knights in futuristic armor hunt down supernatural creatures like werewolves. Every corner of that world feels handcrafted. The lighting, the textures, the atmosphere, it all looks like a high-budget movie paused mid-scene. The combat might not reinvent the wheel, but it brings just enough punch and polish to make every fight feel cinematic. It's a cover-based third-person shooter at its core. But what really stands out is the weight behind every weapon. Guns don't just look cool, they sound and feel powerful, especially experimental ones like the thermite rifle or arc gun, which add a splash of steampunk flair to your arsenal. And enemies react with convincing physics, ducking for cover, occasionally try to flank, and keep you just alert enough, even if the AI isn't exactly groundbreaking. And yeah, there's melee, but it's all QuickTime stuff, only popping up in set moments. Still, it looks brutal and adds to the cinematic vibe when it kicks in. The total production cost reportedly hit around $50 to $70 million, a huge investment for a brand new IP. But Sony had big hopes for it, expecting the game to become a system seller and push millions of units. Internally, the target floated around 4 to 5 million copies, but in reality, it barely crossed the 1 million mark after years on the market. That huge gap between expectation and reality basically shut down any chance of a sequel. It's a textbook example of how insane production values and top-tier visuals don't always guarantee commercial success, especially when the marketing sets the wrong expectations.
Neutralized. Bloody hell. Looks like that was the last of them.
Atomic Heart showed up like it just kicked the door open, dressed like BioShock but speaking fluent chaos. It threw players into a twisted Soviet fever dream, packed with creepy robots, exploding polymer, and more neon wires than a synthwave concert. But instead of riding high on that initial hype, it crashed into a wall of bugs, awkward dialogue, and controversy that left a lot of people jumping ship before they even reached the good stuff. The combat in Atomic Heart is a wild mix of gunplay and elemental chaos. You're constantly switching between traditional weapons like shotguns, pistols, and axes, and a set of special powers you channel through a high-tech glove. These powers let you electrocute enemies, freeze them in place, or even lift them into the air with telekinesis. And upgrading in Atomic Heart isn't just about stacking numbers, it actually changes the way you play. You collect resources scattered across the world, break down old gear, and use vending machines that are, let's just say, way too flirty for comfort. Through these machines, you can craft new weapons from scratch or upgrade existing ones with add-ons like elemental damage, recoil control, or extended magazines. But the real fun is in the skill trees tied to your glove. Each power, like shock, freeze, or telekinesis, has its own path, and upgrading them can unlock stuff like chain lightning or freezing explosions that totally flip the combat on its head. Sure, the pacing can be all over the place and the main character talks way too much, but underneath all that noise is a game that swings for the fences. And despite all the buzz, Atomic Heart didn't exactly break records when it came to sales. The game reportedly cost around $25 million to develop, which isn't massive by AAA standards, but it's still a big swing for a debut title from Mundfish. Early projections hinted at hopes of selling at least 5 million units to call it a true success. But by the end of its launch window, estimates suggested it had only hit around 1.5 to 2 million copies sold, with much of that momentum coming from interest on Game Pass rather than full-price purchases. That's not a complete disaster, especially for a new IP with such an experimental vibe, but it definitely fell short of the publisher's higher expectations. The mixed reviews, performance issues, and geopolitical controversies didn't help either, all of which likely capped its commercial potential right out of the gate.
was a pleasure serving with you, Major P3. Unfortunately, you are about to be killed.
Where's your fucking button? Lord Scrotus will be pleased.
Mad Max dropped at the worst possible time. The same year gave us The Witcher 3, Fallout 4, and Metal Gear Solid 5. And in the middle of those giants, it barely made a sound. But here's the thing, this game didn't flop because it was bad. It just showed up to the wrong party. The combat in Mad Max is split between brutal brawls and chaotic vehicular warfare, and both are way more satisfying than most people expected. On foot, you've got a counter-based system that rewards good timing, and Max can chain together attacks, parries, and finishing moves that leave enemies limping or knocked out cold. It's not just about spamming buttons, you need to read the fight, control the crowd, and know when to dodge or go all in. Now, behind the wheels, you're constantly modifying your car with better armor, ramming grills, harpoons, spikes, and even explosive projectiles. Road battles feel like twisted demolition derbies, where you sideswipe enemies, blow up convoys, and rip drivers right out of their seats. The best part? Both systems work together. You might chase down a gang on the highway, smash their ride into scrap, and then jump out to finish off whoever survives. It's seamless, violent, and exactly what you'd expect from a Mad Max game. And the world itself deserves way more credit. Sure, it's a wasteland, but it's packed with ruins, hidden spots, and atmospheric storytelling. You don't need dialogue to feel the weight of a broken world when the silence and sandstorms do the talking. From abandoned camps to twisted sculptures made of scrap, every part of the map pushes that Mad Max vibe to the max. The game had a decent launch on paper, but the numbers didn't exactly scream success. Mad Max sold around 1.8 million units in its first year, which sounds okay until you dig into what was going on behind the scenes. According to Avalanche's former CEO, Christopher Sundberg, Warner Bros. Was frustrated with the lower-than-expected sales and ended up canceling premium content that was almost finished. With a production budget estimated between $60 to $80 million, and marketing likely pushing that even higher, it's safe to assume the sales target was around 3 to 4 million units at launch. That would have been enough to cover costs and justify a wave of DLCs or even a sequel. Back when shooters were obsessed with realism, military squads, and dull brown palettes, Bulletstorm showed up like an explosion of neon chaos. The gameplay in Bulletstorm revolves around the concept of skill shots, a system that rewards you for eliminating enemies in the most inventive and brutal ways possible. You're equipped with an energy whip that can pull enemies toward you or launch them into the air, slowing time just enough for you to line up ridiculous combos. Kick them into electrified fences, blast them into a cactus, or detonate them mid-flight. Everything you do earns points based on how flashy and creative you are. These points are your currency, used to upgrade weapons and restock gear, so you're constantly encouraged to experiment and push the chaos further. The game keeps things moving fast, always throwing new weapons, enemy types, and environmental traps at you to keep the action fresh and unpredictable. But underneath all the madness, the game actually had tight controls, polished visuals, and a campaign that never took itself too seriously. The dialogue was unhinged, the pace was relentless, and the whole experience felt like a wild roller coaster that refused to slow down. The problem? It released when the market wanted gritty war stories, and Bulletstorm was way too weird for the mainstream. Bulletstorm was developed by People Can Fly in collaboration with Epic Games, and its production budget reportedly hit around $30 million, pretty steep for a new IP at the time. Publisher Electronic Arts had high hopes, expecting it to move at least 2 million units to be considered a success. But despite a massive marketing push and a demo that got people talking, the game only sold about 1 million copies in its first year. Sales eventually trickled in through bundles and re-releases, but it never reached the numbers EA was aiming for. If you're enjoying the video so far, drop a like. Seriously, it takes less effort than dodging bad hitboxes. And let me know in the comments which underrated game you'd add to this list. Comments help the algorithm realize this channel isn't just shouting into the void, and they keep new content coming. Plus, I check and reply to every single one. So yeah, go ahead and test me. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a pretty good time. It's free, painless, and helps me pretend I actually know what I'm doing on this platform.
You know, we never talked about it while we still...
When Days Gone launched in 2019, it didn't exactly ride in like a hero. Critics called it generic, buggy, and too long for its own good. But underneath all that noise, there's a surprisingly strong open-world survival game with a lot more heart than people gave it credit for. You play as Deacon St. John, a biker and ex-soldier just trying to stay alive in a world overrun by freakers. Basically, fast and aggressive zombie-like creatures. On the surface, it might look like just another post-apocalyptic action game, but the deeper you go, the more it stands out. One of the most underrated features is the bike. It's not just transportation, it's your lifeline. You need to fuel it, repair it, and upgrade it. So, it forces you to plan every trip, scavenge for gas, and think twice before heading into hostile territory. And then there are the hordes, which are massive swarms of freakers that come at you like a tsunami of death. And taking them down isn't just about firepower, it's about creativity, strategy, and using the environment to your advantage. The map is huge and surprisingly varied, with forests, snowy mountains, and ruined towns that feel alive, even in the middle of the apocalypse. The game also throws in unpredictable encounters and dynamic weather, which keeps things tense no matter how far into the story you are. And while the main story has its rough patches, Deacon's personal journey has weight. Sure, there were bugs, performance issues, and repetitive mission design, but with patches in time, a lot of those issues were ironed out. And despite all the mixed reviews and rocky launch, Days Gone actually sold pretty well. By early 2022, it had moved over 9 million units across PlayStation and PC, which is no small feat for a so-called flop. However, internally expectations were even higher, especially considering Sony was aiming to build a new franchise. The production budget was reportedly around $100 million, making it one of the more expensive projects under Sony's umbrella at the time. But the game never quite hit the sales velocity Sony wanted during its initial release window, which hurt its chances of getting a sequel. That's part of what makes its success later on so interesting. It found its audience after launch, slowly building a fan base through word of mouth, discounts, and eventually the PC port. Imagine a mix of Gears of War and a mecha anime, then crank the intensity up to 11, and that's Vanquish. The story kicks off in a near-future version of Earth, where overpopulation and energy shortages have pushed global tensions to the edge. The United States builds a massive space station called Providence to harvest solar energy, but things take a turn when Russian forces hijack it and use its power to destroy San Francisco in a brutal demonstration. That's where you step in as Sam Gideon, a researcher equipped with an experimental battlesuit called ARS. You've got rocket-powered knee slides that let you zip behind cover or flank enemies in seconds, and a slow-motion aiming system that activates when you boost, dodge at the last second, or take heavy damage. This slow-mo isn't just a gimmick. It gives you the edge to land headshots mid-sprint, or react to chaos on the fly. You can carry up to 3 weapons and swap between them instantly. Instead of leveling up through use, your gear upgrades when you pick up duplicates while the weapon's fully loaded. Just don't die, or you'll lose that progress. There's also a melee attack that hits like a truck, but it overheats your suit, so you need to pick the right moment to use it. The enemy AI doesn't play nice either. They'll push aggressively, flush you out of cover, and force you to move constantly. Despite all the adrenaline and polish, Vanquish didn't exactly light up the sales charts. At launch, it moved just under 200,000 copies in its first week in Japan and North America combined. A disappointing number considering the hype and pedigree behind it. Sega had teamed up with Platinum Games expecting a major hit, especially after the critical success of Bayonetta. The total production cost was never officially disclosed, but estimates based on similar projects at the time place hit around the $20 million mark, factoring in development, marketing, and distribution. Internally, expectations hovered closer to the 1 million unit range, especially with big publishers hoping to push it as a flagship shooter. Unfortunately, it barely crossed that milestone over its entire lifespan, and only after years of bundled deals, discounts, and a later remaster.
If they all fucking die before they get here! Don't just spray and pray! Concentrate your fire, damn it! We need to take down that cannon! We can't let them take out any more Marines!
Okay then, let's fight.
When Ninja Theory took over the Devil May Cry reboot, the internet exploded. Fans were furious about Dante's new look and edgier attitude, and that backlash completely overshadowed what the game actually delivered. And that's the real shame here, because DMC is one of the most stylish, fluid, and downright fun action games of its time. The combat system is insanely responsive, letting you juggle enemies mid-air, switch weapons on the fly, and pull off flashy combos without breaking a sweat. Every move flows into the next, every hit has weight, and mastering the mechanics feels like learning an instrument. Awkward at first, but incredibly satisfying once it clicks. Visually, the game goes all in on its surreal style. The world shifts and warps around you like a fever dream, turning entire levels into living, breathing nightmares. The soundtrack blends heavy rock and electronic beats to match the chaos on screen, adding even more energy to every encounter. And while the story leans into that rebellious, over-the-top tone, it never loses its momentum. Capcom set a sales goal of 2 million copies, which, considering the Devil May Cry brand, didn't seem too far-fetched. But in the end, the game sold about 1.5 million units. Not a total failure, but still below expectations. The production cost was estimated to be around $10 to $15 million. And with marketing added on top, Capcom expected stronger returns. The lukewarm reception from longtime fans and the split in the community definitely hurt its commercial momentum. Despite the strong gameplay and critical praise, the controversy surrounding Dante's redesign created a wall that many players just didn't want to climb. Ironically, it found more appreciation over time, with many now recognizing it as one of the most mechanically polished entries in the series. If Capcom had positioned DMC as a spin-off or alternate take, without touching the main timeline fans were already loyal to, there's a good chance the reception would have been way more positive.
How about I kill you and piss on your corpse for cold water?
As Phoenix traveled through the underworld.
Immortals Phoenix Rising dropped out of nowhere, got slapped with the label Zelda clone, and kind of disappeared before most people gave it a real shot. But here's the truth. This game is way more than a cheap imitation. It's a wild, colorful adventure, packed with mythology, sarcasm, and one of the most genuinely fun open worlds of its generation. You play as Phoenix, a customizable hero on a mission to save the Greek gods from a massive, lava-spewing titan named Typhon. Sounds serious, but the tone was totally the opposite. The story is narrated by Zeus and Prometheus, like two bored podcast hosts bickering their way through a mythological disaster. But the real hook is the gameplay. Exploration feels smooth and rewarding, with plenty of puzzles, hidden challenges, and cool loot scattered across floating islands and mythical landmarks. Combat is flashy and fast-paced, combining swordplay, bow attacks, and divine powers that let you juggle enemies or slam them into the ground with giant hammers from the gods. And the puzzles? They're everywhere and surprisingly smart. Some are about physics and timing, others about observation and problem-solving. And instead of just killing time between fights, they feel like an actual part of the world. Visually, it leans into a cartoonish but striking style, with exaggerated colors and designs that make every environment pop. The game was backed by a production budget estimated at around $60 to $70 million, including marketing, and the goal was to turn it into a long-term franchise. Internal projections were optimistic, with expectations aiming for at least 3 million units sold within the first year. But by mid-2021, sales hovered just over 1.5 million units, a respectable number, but way below target for a project of that scale. Part of the problem was brand confusion. The name change from Gods and Monsters to Immortals Fenyx Rising, due to a trademark dispute, ended up hurting visibility and marketing momentum. It didn't help that the game dropped alongside titles like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Cyberpunk 2077, making it feel like the underdog in a very crowded ring. Despite strong post-launch word of mouth and a loyal fan base, the commercial performance just didn't justify a sequel, and Ubisoft quietly canceled the follow-up in 2023. Sleeping Dogs launched with everything stacked against it. The game had already been canceled once under the name True Crime Hong Kong, only to be rescued and rebranded by Square Enix. That kind of troubled development usually spells disaster, but somehow, it delivered one of the most stylish open-world games of its generation. Set in a vibrant and gritty version of Hong Kong, the game throws you into the life of Wei Shen, an undercover cop trying to dismantle the triads from the inside. But this isn't your typical GTA clone. Sleeping Dogs blends martial arts combat, intense shootouts, and cinematic storytelling into one tight package. The hand-to-hand combat is a highlight, clearly inspired by action flicks and classic kung fu choreography. It's fast, brutal, and fluid, letting you chain together combos, environmental takedowns, and finishers that feel straight out of a Hong Kong action movie. Gunplay and car chases are just as satisfying, with mechanics like bullet time and car hijacking at full speed keeping the adrenaline pumping. The city itself feels alive, with back alleys, neon-lit markets, and high-rise shootouts adding depth and variety to every mission. There are karaoke bars, street races, and random encounters that make you want to explore every corner. Financially, Sleeping Dogs walked a rocky path. After being canceled by Activision, the project was picked up by Square Enix, who invested heavily to revive it, and estimates put the total cost, including marketing, at around $65 million. That's blockbuster money, especially for a game that wasn't tied to an established franchise anymore. Square Enix had high expectations, projecting 5 to 6 million units sold to justify the investment. But by the end of its first year, Sleeping Dogs had only moved about 1.75 million copies. It eventually crossed the 2 million mark, thanks to word of mouth and a later definitive edition, but it still fell short of those internal targets. The game was well received critically, and players loved its unique setting and gameplay. But in terms of sales, it didn't quite hit the mark. In 2013, a game called Remember Me hit the shelves with a bold idea and a world packed with potential. Set in a futuristic version of Paris, it imagined a society where memories could be edited, sold, stolen, and remixed. You played as Neelan, a memory hunter who had her own past wiped clean and was fighting to piece it back together. And that setup alone was already more original than half the sci-fi we get in games these days. The world, called Neo Paris, looked stunning, with glowing billboards, layered architecture, and that perfect mix of tech and decay that screams cyberpunk. But what really made Remember Me stand out was the memory remix mechanic. You'd dive into someone's mind and change key moments in their memory, shifting how they remembered an event and sometimes even who they became because of it. The combat, on the other hand, didn't hit quite as hard. It used a customizable combo system that sounded great on paper, but in practice felt stiff and repetitive. You could tweak your combos to heal, deal more damage, or reduce cooldowns, but most players ended up sticking to what worked and ignoring the rest. The linear level design didn't help either. Despite the beauty of Neo Paris, the game rarely let you explore freely or interact with the world in meaningful ways. Still, there was something about Remember Me that stuck. The soundtrack was atmospheric and emotional, and the game hit deep themes like identity, surveillance, control, and Nylon herself had a strong presence. It's the kind of game that, even with its flaws, makes you think. Capcom had high hopes for Remember Me, expecting it to sell around 2 million units. But things didn't exactly go as planned. The game ended up selling just over 600,000 copies worldwide. Not a total disaster, but far from what they were aiming for. The production budget was estimated to be around $10 million, not counting marketing, which added even more to the final bill. The lack of strong marketing push and a somewhat confusing genre identity didn't help either. It wasn't quite a brawler, not quite an RPG, and not really an open-world game either. And that made it a hard sell, especially in a year packed with big-name releases.
Unspoken death.
Scratch! Rip! Guard for our brothers!
Are you craving even more ridiculous and monumental flops? Then I'm leaving 2 videos on screen that you're definitely gonna enjoy. And hey, don't forget to drop a comment on all of them to help out your buddy Sage.